The 88mm Flak 36, how one gun could disrupt the offensive. Even before the appearance of infantry, when you think about anti-aircraft guns, what comes to mind? Something pointing at the sky, right? Something designed to shoot down planes. Now ask yourself, what happens when you take that gun, lower the barrel to horizontal, and aim it at tanks instead? The answer changed warfare forever and made Allied tank crews develop a very specific fear, the fear of a gun that could kill them from distances they didn't think possible. The 88mm Flak 36 wasn't designed to fight tanks. It was designed to destroy bombers at high altitude. But somewhere between 1936 and 1945, this anti-aircraft weapon became the most feared anti-tank gun on any front. Tank commanders who survived encounters with it described the same thing. You'd be advancing, everything seemingly clear, and then your lead tank would simply explode. No warning, no visible enemy. Just a sound like fabric tearing, then metal turning inside out. By the time you located the gun, 2 more tanks were burning. The 88 could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor at 2,000 meters. Most Allied tanks couldn't even fire back effectively at that range. You died before you knew you were in a fight. But here's what makes the story strange. This wasn't planned. Nobody sat down in 1936 and said, let's build the perfect tank killer. They built an anti-aircraft gun. The fact that it could obliterate any armored vehicle on Earth was almost accidental, a consequence of physics, not intention. The 88mm shell needed high velocity to reach bombers flying at 8,000 meters. That same velocity, applied horizontally, turned tank armor into paper. The German military stumbled into this during the Spanish Civil War, and by 1941, they'd turned a defensive weapon into an offensive nightmare. The development began simply enough. In the early 1930s, Germany needed modern anti-aircraft capabilities. The Versailles Treaty had restricted their military development, but by 1933, those restrictions were quietly being ignored. Krupp, working with Swedish company Bofors to circumvent the treaty limitations, developed the first 88mm Flak in 1928. The Flak 18 entered service, followed by the improved Flak 36 in 1936, and finally the Flak 37 in 1937. These weren't revolutionary designs, just competent engineering. High muzzle velocity, good traverse, effective range, a standard anti-aircraft gun for shooting down standard aircraft. The revelation came in Spain. During the Spanish Civil War, German forces, officially volunteers from the Condor Legion, brought their 88mm flak guns to support Franco's nationalists. The guns performed adequately against Republican aircraft, but someone in some moment that wasn't properly recorded in official reports decided to try something different. Soviet-supplied T-26 tanks were causing problems for nationalist infantry, standard anti-tank weapons of the era. 37mm guns, light artillery, struggled against even these relatively thin-skinned vehicles at effective range. The 88mm Flak, however, had no such limitations. The first documented use against armor wasn't accompanied by fanfare. It was practical improvisation. Lower the barrel, load the standard high-explosive shell. Fire, the T-26 with armor between 15 to 30 millimeters thick didn't stand a chance. The 88mm shell, traveling at 820 meters per second, went through it like it wasn't there. What happened inside the tank wasn't pretty. The shell didn't just penetrate, it catastrophically over-penetrated, fragmenting and ricocheting inside the crew compartment. One shot, one kill. Every time. The Spanish experience was noted but not immediately revolutionary. The 88mm remained classified as anti-aircraft equipment. It wasn't until France, in May 1940, that the implications became clear on a massive scale. The French campaign should have been straightforward. German armor and mechanized infantry advancing rapidly, French and British forces defending from prepared positions. What actually happened was stranger. In several engagements, particularly around Arras on May 21st, British Matilda tanks, heavily armored by 1940 standards, immune to most German anti-tank guns, counterattacked German positions. The standard 37mm pack. 36 anti-tank guns literally bounced shells off the Matilda's 78mm frontal armor. German infantry began to panic. Anti-tank crews were firing at point-blank range and watching their rounds ricochet harmlessly away. Then the 88s entered the engagement. The results weren't gradual, they were immediate. Matildas that had been shrugging off dozens of hits from 37mm guns were being destroyed with single shots from positions 1,500 to 2,000 meters away. The British advance didn't slow down, it stopped. Tank commanders suddenly found themselves in a new tactical reality. There was a range where they were visible and vulnerable but couldn't fight back. The 88mm's flat trajectory and high velocity meant it could hit accurately at distances where British tank guns, lower velocity, more curved trajectories, were largely ineffective. You could see the gun firing at you, you just couldn't kill it before it killed you. What made this particularly devastating wasn't just the penetration, it was the versatility. The 88mm used several ammunition types, the Panzer Granit 39 armor-piercing round, high explosive shells, and later tungsten cored rounds. Against tanks, against bunkers, against infantry concentrations, the 88 was effective at all of them. It could switch roles in the time it took to load a different shell. An anti-aircraft gun could become an anti-tank gun, could become an artillery piece, all without moving position. By late 1940, the pattern was established. The 88mm Flak 36, still officially an anti-aircraft weapon, was being deployed in ground combat roles with increasing frequency. In North Africa, Rommel used them with calculated ruthlessness. He understood something his enemies were still learning. The 88 didn't need to hide like a traditional anti-tank gun. Its range meant it could sit in plain sight, hold down behind a ridge or in a shallow depression, and kill tanks long before they could close to effective firing distance. British tank tactics in 1941 were built around closing with the enemy. The 88 made that suicide. The famous engagement at Halfaya Pass in June 1941 demonstrated this with brutal clarity. British armor attempting to relieve besieged Tobruk ran into prepared German positions studded with 88mm guns. The British had numerical superiority. They had newer tanks. What they didn't have was a way to fight an enemy that could kill them from 2,000 meters, while their own guns were effective at perhaps 500 meters. The attack turned into what veterans called Quote 1, tanks advancing across open desert, clearly visible, being destroyed methodically at ranges where they couldn't return fire. Out of approximately 100 British tanks committed to the attack, about half were destroyed or disabled. Most by 88mm guns that the British crews never even saw firing. The problem was geometric as much as technological. Tank battles traditionally happened at ranges where both sides could inflict damage. The 88mm broke that symmetry. It created a kill zone where only one side could fight. And because it was mounted on a relatively mobile carriage, not as mobile as a tank, but movable by truck or half-track, it could be repositioned to create these kill zones almost anywhere. Defensive warfare, historically about absorbing attacks and counterattacking, became about creating geometric killing fields where the enemy died before arriving at effective range. By 1942, the 88mm wasn't an improvisation anymore. It was doctrine. German defensive tactics were being built around it. The gun would be positioned to cover likely armor approaches. Infantry and lighter anti-tank guns would be placed forward as a screen, with orders to fall back when tanks appeared. The 88s would open fire at maximum range, often 2,000 meters or more, destroying lead vehicles. Surviving tanks would have to advance through wreckage, slowing their approach, making them easier targets. Or they'd stop, try to suppress the 88s with artillery, wasting time and allowing German forces to reposition or reinforce. What Allied tank crews learned was simple and terrible. You could survive a lot of things in a tank, but you couldn't survive an 88. Not if it saw you first. The sound became distinctive. That tearing canvas noise of the shell traveling faster than sound, arriving before you heard it fired. Tankers developed superstitions, rituals, anything to cope with fighting an enemy that could kill them from invisibility. Some crews would advance at maximum speed, hoping to cross the kill zone before the 88s could find their range. Others would try to advance in smoke, though the 88's flat trajectory meant it could often fire through smoke at silhouettes. Neither tactic worked consistently. The mathematics were unforgiving. High velocity plus large caliber plus good optics equals dead tanks at long range. The Eastern Front added scale to what North Africa had demonstrated in principle. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the 88mm encountered Soviet armor in massive numbers. Early Soviet tanks, T-26s, BT-7s, were catastrophically vulnerable. Even the heavier KV-1 and T-34, which shocked German forces by being immune to standard anti-tank guns, could be penetrated by the 88 at combat ranges. The famous engagement at Rasenyi in June 1941, where a single KV-2 tank held up an entire German advance for a day, ended when an 88mm battery was brought forward and destroyed it with concentrated fire. The lesson was clear. Soviet armor might be immune to German tank guns and anti-tank guns, but not to the 88. This created a strange inversion. The 88mm Flak 36 was expensive, required a trained crew, and was meant to be shooting at aircraft, but it was being used to destroy tanks because nothing else could reliably kill Soviet heavy armor. German logistics were straining to produce enough 88s for anti-aircraft defense, but commanders were diverting them to ground combat because the alternative was watching their tank forces get destroyed by KV-1s and T-34s. The weapon designed to defend against air attack was instead being consumed in ground battles, and there were never enough of them. Production numbers tell the story. Germany produced approximately 20,000 88mm guns of all variants during the war. Sounds like a lot, until you realize they needed them on the Atlantic Wall, defending German cities from bombers, in North Africa, in Russia, in Italy, in France after D-Day. The 88 was everywhere because it could do everything, and that versatility became a strategic weakness. Every 88mm gun shooting at tanks was an 88mm gun not shooting at bombers. Every bomber that got through because there weren't enough 88s could destroy a factory, a rail yard, a city block. The gun was too good. and that made it impossible to deploy optimally.